Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the dispatch meeting, first of the at least early Monday morning for some of us. Can someone let me know if they can hear me?
This is Barry.
You sound good, Ben.
Okay, thanks. So we should go ahead and get started. I see some people in queue already, so I'm going to see if I can figure out. Well, actually, I think I'm going to run the slides and MC this morning, and Patrick is going to be managing the queue. So I do see some people in queue, Patrick. Let's see if they need to actually speak.
So I've pressed the button for, so Ted is trying to share media and you are screen sharing. So that's why he will not appear yet. And
Okay.
I can queue up Todd here. And Todd doesn't actually appear to be there, so.
Okay. Good morning, Todd's office.
So I think you should just proceed. I think people were just probably playing around with the buttons.
We will proceed then. Again, good morning. Welcome to the dispatch session. And I am trying to manage my multiple screens here and get the right things to happen. So bear with me, please.
Hey Ben, you muted your audio. Yep. Now you should be on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's very strange. I did not intentionally mute my audio. Apparently, when I switched to my other window to control the slides, it muted it. But now it seems to be holding. So let's see if I can still manage the slides. Good. Okay. Now, on to the first order of business, which is the note well. Since this is the first session of the week, we should probably actually talk about this slide since people haven't had a chance to see it. But this is showing that we, by participating here, we agree to certain Ietf policies, primarily the IPR policies and the policies around professional behavior and non-harassment. And you'll see at the bottom the list of the BCPs that cover these things. I suggest that if you haven't read them, definitely read them. If you haven't read them recently, read them again. Now, this is our first meeting that's fully in Meet Echo. So I'd like to ask, if you're speaking, please use a headset. Some people reported getting echo problems in Meet Echo, even though they haven't in other things. So unless you know for sure you're not going to introduce echo in Meet Echo, please use a headset. Please add yourself to the queue if you need to speak. Even though you're in the queue and we're in Meet Echo and everyone can see each other's name, please say your name before speaking, because this is recorded and there will be a separate audio stream where people won't have all the metadata. The discussion inside the chat room inside Meet Echo is the same as the Jabber room, so everyone can see everything there. Since we are fully virtual, I expect there will be some side discussions that pop up over there, and that's perfectly fine. But please remember, if you're having interesting substantive discussions in Jabber that are relevant to what's going on in the room audio, please consider taking important points to the queue. You don't have to worry about blue sheets. They're magic this time. Blue sheets will be taken from our roster. Then we've got some useful links there that might be helpful to you if you had them before right now. And this is our agenda for the day. All of our actual topic discussions are going to be in Dispatch. We're going to cover Ted's RFC 3405 update, a proposed working group on HTTP API building blocks, a JSON path draft, and a secure frames draft. Is there anything that needs to be on this agenda that's not, or any other agenda matching? I am not hearing any, so let's move forward. And then we will have the art area meeting. And right now, the only thing we have in the art topic is the discussion of some other meetings that people might be interested in as the week proceeds. And we often have some confusion about the fact we have a separate dispatch mailing list and art mailing list. So we like to remind people the art mailing list and the art part of our meeting is for discussion of general art topics that might be of interest. So if you're working on something you think other people might be interested, you want to check, that's the place to go. Dispatch is for discussion of actual work proposals where we want the IETF to do something. And we handle that in the dispatch meeting and the dispatch mailing list. And then we will jump into the dispatch topics. It looks like Ted was here a minute ago. I believe he's first up. Before we jump too far into these, I would like to remind people the point of discussion in dispatch is to figure out how to proceed with the work, not to necessarily do the work. So as we go through these, I would like people to keep in mind one, whether this is work we think the IETF needs to do, and two, what's the proper venue for doing that work. And it certainly makes sense to have clarification discussions on the technical aspects of a proposal, but we don't want to dive too deeply into trying to fix all the technical aspects right now. So what I would recommend is people think about clarifying questions and then think about the question about how should we proceed with this work, where's the right place to do it, etc. And with that, I think if looks like Ted is in queue and ready to go, and we're going to try to manage the slides from here. So Ted, if you will let me know when you want to change slides if I don't anticipate it.
You should be live.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as appropriate. I'm Ted Hardy from Google, and this is a discussion of Draft Hardy Dispatch RFC 3405 update. Next slide, please. So, what's the issue? Long ago, the DDDS was defined in a bunch of different RFCs, part 5 of which describes registration procedures. In particular for the registration procedures for URI.ARPA. This would give you an entry in the URI.ARPA zone. The document requires that registrations be in the Ietf tree of URI registrations. This is a bit of a problem because the use of the URI scheme name trees, so the Ietf tree versus other types of trees, was defined in RFC 2717 but dropped in 4395 and subsequent versions of that BCP. So there's kind of no way to actually meet the processes set out in the DDDS requirements. Next slide, please. I can't hear Ben, and it didn't advance the slides. Okay, what's the proposed fix? It says that registrations in URI.ARPA must be for schemes which are permanent registrations as they're described in BCP 35. Next slide. Congrats, you've now read the draft. Next slide. No, really, that's everything that's in it that isn't boilerplate. So you're starting off the week right. Ietf108, you've actually read the first draft in the first working group. Congrats. Next. So why that particular fix? That's the closest we can get to the original sense of the Ietf tree in RFC 3405, given the current rules. But we're not really here to discuss that. Next slide. We're discussing where shall we discuss this. So that's the dispatch question for today for this draft.
So we've had some discussion of this on the list, and we proposed at one point that this might be the sort of draft that Dispatch would take on as a so-called simple administrative draft. Since we raised that question, we had some people suggest that they would prefer otherwise, and this might be better to be AD sponsored. So what do people think?
I am fine with any of the above.
We'll start with John. Whoops, John left the queue already. Oh, there he is. My apologies. John Clemson.
Can I ask a meta question? When we were doing the URN update, the impression was that DDDS was pretty much dead. Is it in active use for something we didn't know about? And if the answer is no, then do we need to do this? Does it need a bit of housekeeping, or should we be talking about deprecating it?
So the reason this came up was because there was somebody who wanted to do a registration in the URI.ARPA zone. So I believe there is active interest, even if there is not active use of the zone in other protocols.
Okay, this turns into the more general question about registrations and documentation and vanity registrations. But having said that, I think I'm probably through.
So, John, I was a little confused about the conclusion. Having said that, you're probably, I just couldn't hear you.
I probably don't have more to say about this. I don't have any strong opinions about where it should be discussed. I'm just worried about allocation of resources to a protocol which is not in use, and consequently the registrations in which are likely to be vanity things we don't care about, or we shouldn't clutter up registries or the DNS tree about. But
okay, thanks. Barry's next.
Okay, thank you. This is Barry Leva, AD. I'd like to hear from the people who think we should not handle it as a simple administrative registration document in the dispatch working group itself and want it AD sponsored. Why? Why do you object to having it handled by the dispatch working group?
Thanks. I'll put Cullen at the mic. Cullen, you actually have to send both audio and video separately if you'd like to do video. I think you're ready.
Actually sending audio and video at this point? It looks like I am. How exciting. So I was actually going to suggest that in dispatch working group administratively was fine, but I think AD sponsored is fine as well. It gives the AD a little bit more coverage, and given there's likely to be appeals around this, having a working group consensus around it might be a slight advantage. That's the only thing I would mention.
Go ahead, Barry. Barry, I cut you off because reflow on the screen there when Fluffy left.
Okay. Sorry about that. Richard, the dispatch charter does allow dispatch to do documents if they are simple administrative documents, such as registration. This is a little more than that, so because it is changing rules for registration, so it's there's a debate about that. There's already an appeal on this, so we should consider whether having the working group consensus is useful, given that somebody is upset about the situation, or whether the working group doesn't want to touch it, which I would appreciate as well. So I'm willing to do it either way. I'm just trying to push on why people don't want the working group to handle it. That's all.
I will note, this is Patrick. I mean, I will note that the amount of last call time would probably be similar through either path. We discussed probably an anticipated 4-week last call if this was to be handled, by an AD path, and 2 weeks of working group last call plus 2 weeks by Ietf last call if it were to happen through the working group. My concern about the working group is the the fundamental purpose of the working group is to dispatch work to other places, and that we might not have the critical mass of people who are expecting to process documents within our group, and therefore, some concern about whether or not those 2 weeks of last call within the group are really accomplishing anything. They're actually giving it sort of less visibility for something that isn't strictly administrative, as it were. And that would just be my question about the group taking it on. Robert is next in the queue.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So direct answer to Barry, why not do this in dispatch, even if it was just a simple administrative thing? The point of dispatch is to provide a venue for people to figure out where to get work done. And as noise around other topics comes up, we start a simple administrative thing and it becomes horribly not administrative. Let's say that the chatter on this hadn't started until we had already agreed and we're several weeks into processing this. Becomes a huge distraction and adds a barrier, friction, to new work trying to come in and finding out where to go. So I still stand by my original opinion that it was a mistake to expand dispatch's charter to allow it to take on simple administrative work.
Thank you. Spencer. Oh. Spencer, did you want to be in the queue? You disappeared somehow.
Yes. Am I speaking now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Still figuring out the buttons. Where are you expecting the conversation on this to happen? On the Ietf list or in dispatch?
That's kind of the question right now.
Well, I think he might be asking a related question, which is if you had a 2-week last call in dispatch and a 2-week last call on the Ietf, which one would generate the messages and which one would generate discussion? And I kind of suspect that it would be in the Ietf list either way.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Ted.
Philip.
So we've had some discussion in both ways. I see some chatter going on in the chat room that seem to be leaning towards AD sponsored, and then, but I see a little bit of both.
Phil?
Oh. Go ahead.
So Phil, your mouth is moving, but maybe you're muted locally because you're sending media. Now you're not sending audio.
So the audio and video are separate buttons. Maybe you need to click the send audio button to on the right.
Looks like we try again there.
Well, he's sending both audio and video, but the audio is not coming through. Maybe muted locally.
Language, Phil, we can see you but not hear you.
Okay. Oh, try it one more time, Phil, here. Can you
Still
say
nothing,
something?
Phil.
Nothing?
So, Phil, we're not getting anything. If you can maybe enter it into the chat room. Okay, Phil is saying that this is not at all simple. This is not an administrative fix. Not sure it's suited to AD either. Certainly not dispatch. And I was too clicking the audio button out.
So, Phil, you think that this should be handled in a new working group? Shrugs. Okay, thanks.
I don't know if you
Ben,
see it, Phil. Cullen has asked why you think it's complicated. I don't know if Phil's planning to respond to that. I guess we can watch the chat. So I'm hearing some of both sides here. I'm not hearing a strong consensus one way or the other from the discussion. I wonder if we should try out the hum tool. I'm kind of afraid of it. So I don't know how much we can depend on it, but we can see what happens.
I think it's the first meeting of the week. We've got to try the hum tool.
We got to try the hum tool. Okay. So I think we should try two hums here. The first hum is, should this work happen? And whoa, that jumps everyone into the queue.
Do we want to take comments here before the hum? Sure.
The second hum was going to be, where should we do it? But we'll go ahead.
Steve, I'll open up. You've only selected your video, though. You need to also select to send audio, presuming you want to talk. Oh, Steve is trying to share media, which looks just like video to me. So I'm going to assume that's a mistake. He's not trying to share his screen. So Steve, if you'd like to talk, please select the microphone icon or the video camera icon. I think you can proceed, Ben.
Okay, so hum number one, and I'm about to hit the button that offers it, will be, should we do this? Should this work happen? Should the IETF do this work? And when I hit this, you'll see the hum tab at the top of your column over where your media options and chat and stuff are. And here's Cullen with a comment.
I was just going to say, it looks like there's somebody still in queue, and Alyssa suggested that we do a test hum first so people learn how to use the hum tool. I don't know if you saw that. That was all I was going to mention.
I did not see that, but that's a good idea. So here's the hum tool. And I guess there's we'll have two questions for our test hum. The first one will be chocolate, and the second one is vanilla. So to hum for chocolate, hum now. Boy, we get 35 whole seconds to hum about flavors. And if you haven't found it yet, it's on the left side of your screen. the far left tab under the media options, and you can choose various levels of hum volume. And if you don't want to hum, just don't choose anything. Oh, we had Fortissimo for chocolate. I'm not sure we even need to do the vanilla hum, given that choice. So that was just a test. Let's not waste time on vanilla. Let's go back to our original questions. Hum now if you think the IETF should progress Ted's draft. In retrospect, I should have asked that in the negative, because that might have been the more interesting question. We'll do that in a second. We have a Fortissimo for doing this draft. So hum now if you think we should not progress this draft. And while people are humming, I am noting that we're a bit over time on this discussion. We got into a few meta discussions that we're going to need to move forward. So whatever the results of the hum are we're going to need to take to the list for confirmation. We got a pianissimo. So someone did hum, and possibly more than one person hummed that we should not progress this draft. So if anyone is of the opinion that wants to talk about why they think we should not progress this draft, please do so now. I don't see anyone in the queue. So in that case, if you believe that to be the case, please state your opinion on the list really soon now. But we're going to progress with the hums as we had so far for right now. And so now our second round of hums, hum now if you think Dispatch should adopt this work. I feel like we need to play the Jeopardy theme or something while the hum is happening. I wonder if maybe some feedback.
As opposed to should go to AD, or is this should adopt the work at all? I'm not clear on the
Dispatch should adopt the work as a work item. So yes, as opposed to going to AD sponsored.
Thank you.
Starting to take 35 seconds is a long time for a hum. I got piano on that. So if people aren't looking at the results go from niente to fortissimo and have several steps in between. So second half of that hum, please hum now if you think this should be AD sponsored. We're going to have to start asking people to sing during the hum periods. We have Forte on AD sponsored. So we should take this to the list for confirmation. And of course, we have to make sure the area directors will agree to AD sponsor that. Barry, you've had some opinions here. Do you want to make any comment over now that we have the hums?
I will be happy to go with the consensus and AD sponsor it. likely, as soon as we confirm that consensus, I will put it in last call, 4-week last call. So.
Thank you, Barry.
Okay, so I think we're finished there, unless Ted, unless you have any closing comments.
No.
All right, so let's move forward. I believe whoops, I'm in the wrong window to advance my screen. So our next item is HTTP API building blocks. This is Mark. Do we have Mark? I see Mark down as sharing video and audio, but I don't see or hear Mark. Does anyone else?
Not yet, but Australia's a long way away from Spain.
Mark, we're still not seeing any media from you. It's so much fun being the first meeting of the week to use a brand new approach to our meeting technology.
So maybe we should skip Mark and come back to him?
That's what I'm thinking. Let's move forward to we'll skip through these slides real quick, and we'll come back to Mark if we can make this work in a little bit. So next up, JSON path standardization. So this is Karsten. Let's see if Karsten can. I see Karsten.
I see myself too. Can you hear me?
And we hear you.
Great. So this is a bit of a weird presentation because this is something that kind of came to me like a baby laid down on the front porch. But I think it's useful to do this. You know that there is something like XPath in the XML world. Next slide, please. And now that we essentially have finished moving over from XML to JSON, of course, we often have the same problem. We want to identify elements or subtrees in a JSON tree without actually transferring the whole tree, or maybe after having transferred the whole tree, identifying something in there. So the XML world is happy to have XPath, which is a big Turing equivalent monster. And well, JSON never standardized anything for that. However, in 2007, something called JSON path was proposed, and people started using that. Unfortunately, it never came to actually standardizing it. Can you go to the next slide? So these are examples from the original 2007 blog article, and this is about all there is in terms of formal definition of JSON path right now. So if you know XPath, you probably will feel at home pretty quickly. There are a few ways in which this is done differently, and there is also an interesting thing. What is red on this slide, or purple, is an escape to an external query language, or expression language. I'm going to come back to that. So this is how it looks like, and apparently this is appealing to people who have the XPath problem with JSON, so people have jumped on that. Next slide. Now, of course, this is not the only way of doing things. So, for instance, we have RFC 6901 JSON pointer, which is very similar in idea, but has a slightly different syntax, of course, because syntax is where you deviate first. And also the scope of things you can do there is somewhat more limited. So you can point to a single place in a known structure, but you cannot say, give me all books that cost more than $20. That's something you can do with JSON path, and you could do with XPath, of course, but not with JSON pointer. So this is really just a pointer. Another thing that has happened, W3C has actually done XPath extensions for JSON. This, I've been chastised for making a comment like this before in the Ietf, but I will do it again. This looks like somebody got a memo from their boss. We need a check mark for JSON for XPath. Can you put something in? And that was faithfully executed, and XPath can now do JSON. But I haven't met anyone who actually wants to use this. Oh, and we have someone in the queue, so maybe there is a different opinion. Do we want to take that now? No.
Go ahead in the queue, please.
Pamela?
I guess we go ahead, Carsten.
Yeah. Okay. So the rest of the previous slide that you skipped says maybe the question whether, oh, my video has frozen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you don't need video from me. Not my best portrait I'm seeing right now. Anyway, so the question maybe is less, is JSON path always the best tool for the job? But it really is, do we benefit from having a common standard now that JSON path is used a lot out there? Next slide. So shouldn't we have done that in 2007? Maybe, actually. But several things got in the way. So right now, it seems we have all the ducks in a row for doing this. The original JSON path author, Stefan Gössner, is interested in getting this done. And maybe more interesting, there is an amazing project out there that has started documenting the deviations they found in 37 implementations of JSON path. Yeah, we have a lot of information, and I think we can now go ahead and do something similar to what we did in RFC 6901 earlier. Next slide. So this is not just a slam dunk, because after 13 years, of course, there have been a lot of, how shall I put it, improvements in various implementations. And since JSON path left expressions and filters to an underlying scripting language, of course, there are particular differences in how these scripting languages are used. So a PHP version and a JavaScript version may not have the same expression language in them. So there are lots of details, but again, we have this amazing open source project where they put 225 test cases against 37 implementations. Next slide. And they collected all this information. That's a screenshot of the website with a little excerpt through the loop. So we have a lot of information now, and we can start making decisions. And actually, that open source project has started making decisions, so we don't even have to start from scratch. Next slide. So the hard part, apart from getting the details right, which is always hard, will be to decide on the exact direction. So do we do a lowest common denominator and standardize that? That's probably not going to be very useful. Or do we examine the landscape and level all the depressions and fill everything up by concrete? I'm not sure that that's really what we want to do either. So this will be very much about defining a middle ground, finding out where do we actually have a sizable usage out there, and there will be some hard decisions. We may even have something like profiles, a basic profile, a more useful profile. So that's something that the working group needs to decide, and of course the working group needs to do the actual work of writing things down. There are 2 internet drafts right now. One has actually been submitted, the other is only on GitHub. So I'm very optimistic that this work could lead to a result and even lead to it quickly. And next slide. The question, of course, is where do we want to do this? So the size of the work would say maybe a new working group is not entirely wrong. We have been spinning up and shutting down small working groups before, so that would be one way of doing this. Another way would be reviving the JSON working group. There are a lot of people in the JSON working group who are very much aware of this problem. So this would allow us to start with an audience that already can contribute a lot. We could do this in the CBOR working group because the CBOR working group is going to need this in any case in some form. Or we could put it into the new working group that we haven't heard about from Mark yet, that he was trying to talk about a couple of minutes ago. Because JSON path often is used over HTTP, as is everything else. So for me, this is a little bit of a wildcard working group, and I wouldn't object too much against doing JSON path in there, but I think it's a better thing. We send a stronger signal to implementers and users if we make this a little bit more visible instead of burying it in that working group. Next slide. So please dispatch.
All right. We can accept comments from the group. Mark, you're queued with video, but not audio. I'm not sure if that's all right. Looks like you want both. Let's see how this goes. We see you this time.
Ooh, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Yes.
My goodness. Just changing browsers fixes everything. So, Karsten, thank you. That was a really good presentation. That answered a lot of the questions that I've been forming. Could we go back to the last slide, please? My concern is that when you have something that's been out there for so long, and you have so many implementations and also undoubtedly so many users, any changes are going to be very difficult, and you're inevitably going to break someone. And so I wonder at what point do we say we don't call the output of this work JSON path, we call it something else. And at what point do we not make the output look like current JSON path? Because if it looks like the same artifact on the wire, it might confuse people. And those are the kinds of questions that I think people should be asking about this. If it would be a shame to cause more confusion in the marketplace by trying to standardize something here. I think we all know the cartoon that applies. In terms of where do we want to do it, I think the first 2 options are fine. A new working group or reviving the JSON working group, although probably a new working group would be better just to keep it well scoped. I don't think doing it in CBOR is a good idea because it's one consumer for this work. It's not everyone. I agree that doing it in HTTP API might be interesting and in scope, but I worry that I want, and we'll talk about this more hopefully later. I want that group to get off on its feet first before taking on really big things, and this might be too much to ask at first. I don't think putting it there, if it's successful at some place, you'd want to do this kind of work, but maybe not as one of the first work items, is how I would put it. How do I stop?
You. Brian Rosen, your turn.
So I like Karsten, have needed this for quite a while and have bemoaned the fact that there is no standardization. I'm currently working on a project that is going to use it with the current level of document, meaning the original draft. I do think that we can get over the hurdles of getting something that is mostly conformant to existing implementations, and as was pointed out, there are a lot of implementations. By definition, we're not going to be able to satisfy everybody, but I do think that using the Ietf process we'll be able to get to a reasonable common ground. It'll be sticky, I will, but I'm pretty confident, and we really need this. I really need it. I'm going to work on it. I really don't care where it is. I mean, I think CBOR is probably the wrong place, but all the others seem fine to me, and I don't care. I'll show up wherever that is. I would say to Mark, if you start a new working group and you started an HTTP API, that's the same thing in terms of getting going. I didn't quite get that because it's a new work group either way. Even restarting JSON pretty much is a work group restart. So I really don't care, and I'll go wherever it's set up. Thanks.
Thanks. Colin, you're next.
Are people hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think this should be a new working group, and the reason why is that it certainly can't be done in something like CBOR. It is not really, that's just a consumer, but there's many consumers of it. I think a new working group makes it easier for people who have one of those 37 implementations to not be working in a working group that's trying to do a bunch of other stuff at the same time, and so that's a good reason for that. But I don't think that before we can dispatch really to a new working group, we need a proposed charter. I mean, that's what's supposed to be in a proposal like this at dispatch. It's a requirement for it, in fact. And clearly the scoping of a charter like this is a pretty complicated question. So I think we should spend some time working on it, not necessarily right now, but over time we need to spend some time working on what is the scoping for that, because that'll be the hard part of this.
Thank you. Glenn?
Yeah, I'm one of the implementers, and we've formed a little group of about 19 of us, most of the implementers, to discuss this. And some people want to adopt a standard if it comes along. Other people are happy to describe their behavior of their implementations relative to a standard, so it doesn't necessarily impact users. It's just a source of better documentation in a sense. And the way I see this might work out is if we end up with a standard and an implementation that implements that standard, then that could feed into the comparison project, and so people could then read off the differences of the various implementations they're using relative to the standard and go and read about the standard there. So I was just kind of concerned about the not necessarily being an impact to end users.
Thank you. Mark.
Mark, we're not getting audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now.
It doesn't make a difference to the earlier comment. It doesn't make a difference from the standpoint of this proposal as to whether a new JSON working group or HTTP API, but it doesn't make a difference from the HTTP API working group because that's an effort trying to build a new community. And so taking on a huge piece of work to start with might interfere with that. That's all. That's the point I was trying to make.
So that's everyone I have seen in the queue so far. I think that what I am hearing is that there is interest in this work. people seem to be leaning towards starting a new working group for it, with the possibility of putting it with HTTP API, but we just heard what Mark had to say there. We can discuss that group in a minute, and that might give us some more clarity. Cullen had a good point that if we are going to move forward with a working group, we need a charter. So what I'm hearing from the sense of the room so far is that people think this work is interesting, we should do it, and Dispatch should start talking about a charter for a potential new working group, or in the process of talking about that charter might decide it needs to go somewhere like HTTP API. If anyone thinks that's the wrong approach, please speak now. I'm literally hearing bird chirping. And Spencer.
Okay. The one suggestion I was going to make would be to decide whether you really want the charter discussion to happen on Dispatch or on another mailing list. If you think the answer is going to be chartering another working group, you're going to have the other mailing list anyway.
Spencer, that's a good point. Our usual approach to that Dispatch is we start off in Dispatch. If the conversation gets some momentum, then we'll switch over to its own mailing list.
Cool. Do the right thing, of course.
I'm always, Spencer. So I don't see anyone else in queue. Karsten, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, so I think we have our work cut out for us. So I write the request for the mailing list, and maybe we can get the charter proposal from the various proponents of this in the next few weeks. It's August in Europe, so it's maybe going to be a little slowly, but by the mid of August, I think we should have something. But there is Cullen in the queue.
So great to form a mailing list to discuss the actual work and get that moving. No problem with that. But I think the discussion of the charter should happen on the Dispatch list, where we can call some consensus on it and get that moving forward and everything. Because I do think that that's the hard part of this working group. So I think that Dispatch is a good place to discuss formation of that charter. Primarily because you have chairs to call to consensus. That's what's different from the other mailing list.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Colin. We're not ready to dispatch this without the charter proposal, right? Yeah. But I mean, I think this has been a useful discussion in making that determination when we get there.
Yeah, and look, everybody agrees we want to go do this. There's a list of 19 people, all people already working on it. It's good stuff. Like, I'm not like this is all really good, but I just move it along quickly.
Right, I agree with you, Colin. And even if we had charter discussion on a separate mailing list, we would want to bring it back to Dispatch to actually perform the dispatch. But you remind me of another important point. I want to ask: does anyone want to stand up and say this should go to a buff?
John, you're up.
I don't want to stand up and say that yet, but I think as the beginnings of a charter evolve, I and others might want to change their minds about that.
And that's always a possibility. Part of our dispatch discussion can still decide it needs a buff even further down the line.
Exactly.
Great. Alexander?
Hi, everyone. Alexander Mayover. I mean, my feeling is that this problem is complex enough that it would be useful to send it through a BOF, particularly because we have been waiting 13 years for that standardization work to be started. So we could easily invest another couple of months to start with a BOF. And can we actually do a virtual interim BOF? Is that an option if you want to do it faster?
That is a possibility.
Brian.
I don't think a BOF is going to be particularly useful here unless we get into a major food fight in the charter discussion. If we can quickly come to agreement on what the charter is, then I think we should just run through the dispatch process and not worry much about a BOF. If we do get held up and discussion about how to get going is useful, then I think a BOF is useful. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but if it is, then we'll do a BOF, and maybe virtual and maybe not. But I right now I think we're going to be able to get through a fairly straightforward charter discussion, and then we'll just figure out how to dispatch it. So let's not decide to do that yet, and figure out how the charter discussion goes.
Phil. Oh.
And after Phil, I think we need to close the queue so we can move on.
And Phil disappeared when I activated him. Phil, do you want another chance?
Now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, right. Yeah, I was just going to say that given the way that Carsten set the, I can't see that a BOF actually helps. It would be useful if there were two competing schemes, but given the scope of work, I can't see that a BOF really does anything than delay things.
Thank you.
Okay, so to wrap up here, I believe our path forward then is that the proponents will discuss a charter and bring that charter and discuss that charter in the dispatch mailing list to start out with, and then we will figure out where to go from there.
Right. I mean, I'll remind people we don't do it often on the dispatch list, but we can form consensus there, well in between meetings and not attached to a meeting. So we can, if we make good progress on a charter, don't have to bring this back or wait for 109.
And I strongly recommend that. If we don't exercise the dispatch list, it tends to get rusty.
Grease all the things.
Yes. Okay, let's, I guess we should see if we can get Mark back on. Unless you have any last minute things, Karsten. I'm assuming no, but yell if you do.
No, I'm fine. We'll run off in JSON path mailing list, however it's called, and then come back with a charter proposal.
I see Mark.
Can you hear me?
I can hear Mark.
Okay. So I'm going to talk briefly about a proposal that has been stewing for a little while now. Obviously, HTTP is used to build a lot of APIs in the world these days. When we talk about this, I'm not talking about APIs to use HTTP, which is what some people in this context might be more familiar with. It's using HTTP to build APIs to things in the network. So next slide. To give just a very few examples, if you have the original slide, you can follow all these links to find lots of different APIs for lots of different public projects and companies. This is a very small sample that I just did from memory, more or less. It's next slide. HTTP is also being used for even other more interesting things. I find this just fascinating. In Australia, the Consumer Competition and Consumer Commission, which is making sure that businesses treat consumers fairly, has what they call the consumer data right, which means that first banks and then electricity markets and telecommunications markets have to implement these public HTTP APIs so that people can get their data in and out and have it hosted in other places. And they're doing this API design on GitHub, which I think is fascinating and a little bit frightening. But anyway, it's a really interesting use case for the protocol. Next slide. And in fact, if this is just one directory of APIs using HTTP, has over 23,000 of them. Next slide. So despite broad use of the protocol for lots of different things that we call HTTP APIs, and if folks want to talk about why I'm not saying REST APIs, we can have that discussion, but I'd rather not.
Please don't.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. Practice of building these things is very fragmented. We've been talking about this in standards world for at least a decade and a half. There were the REST wars and the SOAP wars back in the 2000s, the knots, and people building little functional things on kind of one-off basis. But there's still lots of open questions. And generally what happens is a company, once they build a certain number of APIs, they have a team of people building them. And they have to create everything from scratch. They have to answer all these questions and more. They have to decide how they document them, how they put them together, what conventions they use, what color they paint the byte shed. And it's quite a bit of work, and it causes work not only for them, but also, of course, for the consumers of the APIs, because they have to go and figure out what conventions and what practices are in use for each individual API that they consume. Next slide. So the question here then is will creating an IETF working group to work on what we're calling building blocks for HTTP APIs help? Next slide. And so we have done this sort of thing in the IETF in the past, but we've always done them as very much one-off sorts of things on the independent stream. I have a few there, or AD sponsored. So URI templates, JSON pointer, which we were just discussing, which is kind of the analogy to X pointer in the XML world. Web linking, sunset HTTP header field. And so the IETF does have a track record here, but there doesn't seem to be much of a unified approach to an architecture or to solving problems that people are having in this field. And most importantly, I don't think we're doing a very good job in terms of building a community of people that can contribute to the work. It's all very much, well, let's put this out there and see what happens. Next slide. And so what this is a proposal to create an IETF working group to work on those building blocks like I was discussing, rather than using the independent streamer AD sponsorship, to serve as a focal point to build that community, to give feedback to the specification work, and to build a more broad consensus across the industry, get participation from API practitioners and the people on those teams in the various companies and people consuming the APIs, rather than picking winners from each individual area and saying, okay, well, this proposal was brought to us and the proponents decided to come to the IETF, therefore that's the IETF way to do it. I'd rather have a broader, especially when we get into things like API description, there are a lot of different viewpoints on there, and I think as a standards body, we'd be more well served to have a broader set of people contributing rather than just proponents for one particular approach. We want to increase interoperability and reuse, of course, and again, connect with and between the industry and the practitioners and users. So next slide, and I think it's the last slide. Yes, so this is the charter proposal. I've talked to the ADs about this for a little while, and indeed the dispatch chairs, thank you very much for your input. And I've been talking to a lot of people who do this sort of thing as their full-time jobs and getting their feedback and getting their interest. There's a link to the charter on a GitHub if you want to take a closer look. Based on the discussions I've had, I'm fairly hopeful about this group. I think we're going to get some interesting folks show up with some ideas. I've definitely gotten a lot of emails since this proposal went out. I think it's interesting, and I think it's worth doing personally, but I also think it's risky in that we're going to need to enculture a number of new people into the IETF to make it work properly. And I think that's going to take a fair amount of time and work. I'm willing to put some work into it, but I'm not putting my name forth to chair this working group. So the chairs are going to need to put some work into it. And so what this charter recommends is splitting up a working group without any defined deliverables. There's no technical deliverables in this, but for it to consider what building blocks it should start working on, and once it gains consensus, start shipping those. And then the presumption being that in 6 months, 9 months, a year, the community looks and says, okay, is this working group successful? Is it producing things? Is it representative of the broader community, which it's supposed to be representative of? If so, it should continue, and if not, maybe we need to rethink it. So it's a little bit of an experiment, but I think a worthwhile one. So that's, I think, all I have. Questions, comments? Pete.
Open the queue. Pete, be first.
Hey, that actually worked.
Hi, Pete.
Hey, so question about the interest that you talked about. First of all, are you getting interest from both people who want to provide APIs and people who want to use APIs? And what is their level of excitement, interest, what have you?
I can barely hear you, Pete.
Oh,
but
well, I'll use different in just a moment. But
I did comprehend, so you don't have to repeat. I'm hearing a lot from people who have specs that they think might be interesting. I'm hearing a bit from folks in the industry who are the people who have the most time for this and probably the most long-term motivation are those people I spoke of in those API teams who, whether it's for GitHub or Stripe or any of those companies, they are charged with making sure that their APIs are usable and sustainable and doing best practice and defining what the best practices are. And I think they do talk amongst themselves in different communities, but if the Ietf were to start work here, I think that they would be interested in participating in the conversations.
I actually
Ooh, that's better.
think, yes, I turned up my gain. I think it's more interesting that the providers of APIs are the ones that you've heard want to do this. I think the users might pick up whatever those APIs are eventually.
Sure.
But if the providers are
Sure.
there and they sound relatively interested, I think that's sufficient to move forward.
Yeah, I think that for me, if we launch this, I would want to come back in, like I said, 9 months or a year, and take a good look at participation in the group. And if it isn't representative of the broader industry, if it's just academics or if it's just a few people with a hobby horse, then that to me is a bad sign.
Cool. Thanks.
Rich.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. I just wonder.
Rich, I canceled you due to reflow there when Pete removed himself. I'm sorry. If you just raise your hand, we'll stick you right back on. That is very frustrating. There you go. Sorry. Richard should be back in if you want to try again.
Yeah, I wonder if this is a few years too late, because if we devise a standard, everyone's going to have to revise it, and all of a sudden you add technical debt to everyone who's already got their bespoke channels. If you think it could actually succeed.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been watching this area for more than a decade, and if we could have done it earlier, I think we would have, but it was just too fragmented. I think people are feeling enough pain from the fragmentation that it has a better chance now, to be honest. And yes, people, are going to need to adopt things when they have an opportunity. People do generally redo their APIs every once in a while, so I'm not too worried about that. I think, especially if we focus on small building blocks rather than, if this working group were to say, let's come up with the framework for all HTTP APIs and you have to buy into the whole thing or never mind, I would be very concerned. It really does need to be small pieces loosely joined, I think, to be successful. And the other thing I'll mention is that, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention before, these sorts of things come up regularly in the HTTP working group. We occasionally adopt one or consider one, like the rate limiting headers. I think we're kind of had an eye on for a little while, but they're not clearly in scope for that group. And the people in the room are more implementers at a lower layer, so they're not terribly comfortable with it. And the folks who are coming in aren't terribly comfortable or maybe a little intimidated by all these low layer implementers. So that's why the separation from the HTTP working group.
Okay, thanks.
Martin, you're ready.
Yeah. So Mark, you bear the scars of the devil.
You're breaking up.
Well, kind of. I'll type it.
You seem fine
So
now.
Martin, we might get you better with just audio.
No, you're fine now, actually. Sure. Sure. I think that the most damaging factors in WStar were a handful of large vendors with a tremendous amount of power, and using that to try and get market share rather than do technically good things. I think that there was a strong flavor of what some called architectural astronautics happening, and frankly, there was a fair amount of participation in bad faith. So there was lots of badness happening there. Certainly, if we see the same factors here, I'd be worried, but I don't see too much. I mean, middleware, making things too middleware focused is definitely a concern, and there are these API gateway vendors. So far, most of the patterns that they're using and defining are not steering things towards where you have to have some sort of service bus or some sort of, mandatory middleware component. So I'm not too worried yet.
Ron.
Hey, this was partly said in Jabber in the meantime as well, but I just wanted to respond to Richard's point that yes, ideally it would have been great to do it earlier, but the alternatives that we have available to us are now or later. So the question is now better than later? And I think to that the answer is probably yes.
Thank you. Ecker.
Ecker, we're neither hearing or seeing you.
I'm going to leave you active. Maybe that'll help sort that out, and just
maybe now.
Harold.
There he is. Hi, Ecker.
So like it doesn't. You're kidding. Like it doesn't automatically start sending when like I'm added to the queue. Outstanding. Mark, this seems interesting. Maybe I can send video too. Maybe that'll actually work. Nope.
You were sending video.
You turned it off.
Am I doing anything now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
There you are. We can see you.
Fantastic. So I'm interested in primarily here in point 2D. 2A through C may be interesting. My impression of the people who do APIs is they often don't want to screw with new headers and status codes because they want to make browser APIs. They're accessible via fetch or XHR. Not everybody does, of course. So I know there's been a lot of discussion in the HTTP community about what the best way to actually design APIs is. Should you just be exposing your ORM? Should you be at higher level APIs, et cetera? So you get things like TastyPie or whatever. I guess how much of that do you think is in scope for this under 2D?
I think none of it is in scope at the start.
Okay.
If we can build a successful group, maybe.
Okay. So what would be in scope for 2D?
At the start?
Yes.
Probably more constrained best practices, not for how you build an API, but how you do a particular function. Paging through an API, for example, or something like that.
Okay. Maybe I could just get you offline because I'm not sure I quite understand it. Anyway, this seems like reasonably okay, but it just seems like I'm not sure how to draw the line between the things you think would be in scope in 2D and things you got out of scope.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to be the chair, so it's not my decision.
Right. But the charter ought to be clear enough. The chair could sure. Perhaps do that.
Yeah. Okay. We should talk offline. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So for time reasons, we need to cut the queue after Harold.
Hi, Harold's chair.
All right. I think we should move on from that one.
Okay, let's move on. I am hearing interest in the work, and I'm not hearing that the charter is completely wrong. I'm hearing a few questions about the charter. I think that without putting myself in the queue, I think the idea of the group that starts, Harold is back, but I'll finish my comment. I think that the idea of the group that starts up and then figures out its work is kind of interesting. A little different than we normally do it, but it's kind of interesting, and we'll see what the area directors have to think about that one. But I think we should hear from Harold, and then we should probably take this back to the list with the idea that we are at the refining of the charter stage in preparation to dispatch it very shortly. If anyone objects to that, please object on the list, because we're about out of time. We should go ahead and well, I see Brian, who is our, I saw Brian, and I saw Harold try to get back in. And Brian is our Jabber scribe, so I'll go ahead and let him say something.
Brian?
Sorry, you said you wanted to move on, so I pulled back. I think we should go. I think we could probably pick a couple of things you mentioned and make them initial charter items. I mean, versioning is the one that strikes me as immediately useful, an immediate problem. Happy to work on it. So I'm very optimistic about this. Let's get going.
API versioning is one of the more controversial bits out there. Yeah, I would really like to see this group do a couple of really small things first and prove itself, and also give external folks enough time to come to the venue, rather than taking on something really meaty as its first item. But that's just my personal take.
So Ben, Mark, I mean, it sounds to me like we have, budding consensus here that if we have, a refined charter, we want to recommend a working group get formed directly. Is that what you folks are hearing? And should we try and confirm that, or are we comfortable where we are?
I am not hearing anyone stand up and say we shouldn't do it. So I'm comfortable with going to the list with that in mind, and with the idea that we will turn around and hand a proposed charter over to area directors in a small number of weeks.
Right. So if anyone objects,
you're hearing me saying you shouldn't do it.
I'm sorry.
That was a hit and run, Harold. There you are. You're back.
I'm trying to get my place in queue, but I keep losing it. The big thing here is when we're talking APIs, we traditionally talk to the WTC. The charter does not mention language, and it doesn't mention a WTC. I think the charter as proposed is therefore incomplete. Even if you have a reason to believe that we can have a friendly cooperation with them with this work being done in the Ietf, then we need to say that explicitly why we believe so.
What do you mean by language, Harold?
Frankly, every attempt I've seen that tries to define an API without defining which language is the definition language has failed. In practice, WGC is currently specifying for all their APIs in terms of JavaScript, and then the others.
But they're using WebIDL, and that's not the focus of this group at all.
I'm saying that unless we explicitly address the question of what language are they supposed to be using, right, the charter is incomplete.
So, Harold, the W3C uses WebIDL to define APIs for inside of browsers. That is not in scope for this working group.
Okay, then the scope of this working group is unclear to me, and the charter is unclear.
Okay.
Okay, so we need to take further charter discussion to the list. We're going to have to move on because we're starting to run out of time. But I think the way forward that we just talked about is still true. We just need to make sure we have the charter properly refined.
So just half a second. Harold, look at item 1, machine-to-machine communication. That's the key. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to see if we can advance the slides. And since we're out of order, oops, that's not good. Here we go. And we're on death frame.
Okay.
We see you.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Imad Umara. I work for Google. So I'm here going to discuss Ietf end-to-end encryption for video conferencing proposal. So I only got 20 minutes. I will not go into deep into the document draft itself. Hopefully everyone gets a chance to read the draft. I'll just a very high-level overview of the document. Then the goal of this presentation, just to see what's the next step for this work.
Okay, and real quick, you actually have less than 20 minutes because we're running over time, so go fast.
Cool. Next slide, please. So the goal for Ietf is, of course, security, doing end-to-end encryption for all for endpoints in video conferencing. The next two ones are very important. Simplicity. We need to, the goal is to minimize the changes needed for existing media servers and endpoints to adopt Ietf. And the other one is efficiency. Minimize the encryption overhead as much as we can for endpoints. And compatibility with existing protocol like WebRTC, still working with error correction mechanism like FEC, RTX. And also transport agnostic can be used with RTB, can be used in the future with other protocols like QUIC. Next slide, please. So this is usually how video conferencing works in these settings. Each client sends multiple streams to a central server, like low resolution, high resolution, medium resolution, and these streams are encrypted to the server only. The server have access to the media, and then the server decide which destination gets which stream. Next slide, please. So with Ietf, we add another layer of encryption where we encrypt the entire media frame for each stream, and then we leave the metadata only encrypted to the server. So the server can only access the metadata of the media to know how to route the media, but doesn't get access to the media itself. The end-to-end keys are negotiated end-to-end out of band. It's encrypted end-to-end, only the metadata encrypted hop by hop. Each user using their own sender key to encrypt their outgoing traffic. It can be used with any existing KMS like Signal, in the future with MLS. And in this case, the server doesn't have access to the media, just only the metadata. Next slide, please. And this is, for example, a simple integration with WebRTC. So Ietf is injected after the encoder and before packetization. And then it encrypts the entire frame, passes the full frame to the packetization, and then the packetizer just splits the frame into smaller packets, and these smaller packets are encrypted only to the server. The encryptor and decryptor communicates with the messaging server to exchange the keys. Usually use a signaling channel for this. Next slide, please. This is the encryption schema. It's very pretty straightforward. So it encrypts the entire frame, as I said. So basically, what user exchanges actually master keys, and from these master keys, we derive 3 different keys: encryption key, authentication keys, and salt key. The entire frame is encrypted with the encryption key. Metadata and header authenticate, and the encryption authenticated with the authentication key, and salt key used to just derive the IV. Oh, here we go. And then the encrypted frame is split into multiple packets. The first packet has the header, and the last packet has the authentication tag. Next slide, please. And this is a Y format. It's just a big chunk of encrypted frame. It prefixed with the Ietf header, which has the IV, some metadata, and suffix with the authentication tag. There are 2 versions of the header: short header, which only have the key ID in case the key rotation, 3 bits for key ID, so support up to from 0 to 7 keys, and the counter length, which is IV, and this is since it's encoded in var_ent. In case of key ID is increased more than 8, we actually use a long header. In this case, key length bits from 5 to 7 use the length of the key ID. Then the subsequent bits are the key ID itself. Next slide, please. Encryption overhead is actually, usually comes from the IV and authentication tag, and with Ietf actually beats existing or other E2E protocols because the authentication tag and IV are amortized over the frame and not per packet. Of course, for audio, 1 frame equals 1 packet, but for video, 1 frame usually is split into multiple packets. Also, even more, we Ietf using var_ent, as we saw on the last slide, to encode the IV, so it reduces overhead even more. Next slide. So what's the current status? So we have the Ietf draft. It's mostly complete. The encryption scheme is complete. There's still ongoing discussion about should we include signature scheme? Should we include like more fees for the PIV? We still need a couple more different to have like a more complete solution, like that, for example, the key and key negotiation. Can we integrate with existing MLS to be more efficient using a single root tree with usually actually designed for large group like 50,000 participants? It's even be more efficient. And maybe another draft for how this integrates with RTC, how the key are negotiated using the signal channel, what should be the payload type, how the metadata are passed. This is in terms of the specs. In terms of implementation, Ietf has been in production, at least in Google, for the last 2 years. It launched in Duo last year. I know other like Column software also using it, other servers are using it. I believe also other implementations are coming out very soon. And then last slide. So I think what should be the next step? So as I mentioned, like this work has been done like for the last 2 years, but what actually triggered the need recently is since the pandemic started, everyone using video conference, like the industry has shown a huge interest in having end-to-end encrypted video conferencing. Everyone like is just trying to do their own. We wrote this draft. People, there are huge interest in the industry. In this proposal, this is why we wrote this draft. And I want to like, okay, this presenting dispatch and see if people are interested. If so, what will be the next step? Ideally, to have like a new working group to isolate, to track all these type of documents, very focused to get this done, or maybe existing working groups. But yeah, this is the discussion we have right now. Any questions, or how people think where this should go?
I see that Richard is in. There we go. Go ahead, Richard.
Hey, am I audible here?
Yes.
Got my dual monitor set up. I need to face the camera.
Welcome to the new world.
Yeah, I need to face my camera instead of the neat echo screen. So yeah, no, I'm very supportive of this work. As I've highlighted on the mailing list, so folks don't know, we have an S-frame mailing list where we've been discussing this. I think there's some things that need to get nailed down to make this interoperable and widely usable. When I've talked to some media folks around the WebEx team about this, there's some concerns about how it interacts with recovery, how it interacts with using subframes. Because as is now, you either get the whole frame or you get nothing. And there are some systems now that are using subframe units to add more resilience. So I think we need to nail down a couple of things like this, but I think the overall approach, especially in its simplicity, is really on the right path, and we should charter a small focus working group on this. There, just so folks know, there is a draft charter that's been kicked around on the S-frame mailing list a little bit. So I think we could be in a pretty good position to go ahead and form something here.
Colin was there, but he looked like he went away.
No, I'm here.
You're here? Okay.
Yes, it's hard to know when I'm supposed to be talking. So I'm certainly supportive of the work. I'll say I'm supportive of solving this problem. And this type of approach has been adopted in a number of previous, there's been a number of previous bits of work taking this sort of approach. I have some concerns about the details of the proposal and the way the identity in this proposal interacts with the identity management in RTP. And I'm surprised the work isn't being done in the AVT core working group, which has the expertise developing RTP encryption mechanisms and payload formats and dealing with security for media. So I'm very supportive of the work, but I would encourage you to take this to AVT core.
I guess the idea for Ietf was to make it, as I mentioned, like a protocol agnostic or transport agnostic, like it's related to RTP. So the idea here is just to make it like the key management out of band, like using the messaging server or signal channel. But I'm happy to hear other proposals as well over the mailing list.
I mean, I think having key management out of band makes sense. I think we need to make sure that the way it handles participant identity works with and is compatible with the way RTP does it. And I don't believe it is currently.
Bernard.
Due to timing, we're going to cut the queue after the people that are currently in queue.
That would be after Jonathan. Bernard, can you?
We'll give it to Sergio since he got in just as I was.
You can hear me? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear Bernard.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think there is a lot of use for this work. And in particular, there are a lot of situations where this will have much better scaling properties than other things. In particular, because it doesn't change the SFUs. You get to have the RTP scaling properties are dramatically better. We've discussed on the list that there's certain things like signing that can really only be done with this because it dramatically reduces the overhead because you only would sign a frame, not individual packets. So I think we basically should go ahead and standardize this somewhere. Thank you.
Do you have a comment on the new working group versus existing working group question?
I think some of what Emad said makes sense, that it's not RTP specific, so I don't think it has to be an AVT core. I'll let others give their opinion.
Ecker, it's your turn.
Okay, so that's exciting. So I guess I'm generally positive on this. Bernard, I don't think you're quite right about signing. There's been quite a bit of discussion about how to sign in RTP contexts going back about 10 or 15 years. The problem is the same problem here, which is amortizing this integers across multiple packets. So that may or may not be a good idea. We probably should figure that out. I do like the fact that this emphasizes that we need some end-to-end keying. I don't think AVT core is probably the right place for this. Most of the things that would have to do are not going to be AVT, and from previous experiences, I think that there's a bit of like having a separate working group just has the right set of people in the room without having a sort of people kind of like, without having to have like a lot of people sort of sit through one working group for the 5 minutes actually to talk about something.
Thank you. Jonathan.
So yeah, I think. Okay, now you hear me good. Yeah, I think pulling.
Oh, now we do.
What was I going to say? Pulling the I mean, back before the world was all, we were much more many working groups. I would have said AVT core, but now that I feel like, for instance, Perk, for all that Perk may not have been successful as a protocol, I think as a working group model, pulling it out and getting the right people in the group was successful. There is going to be a lot of media specific complexity here, which I'm not sure the current people understand. So it's going to need a lot of the people from AVT core, but I think it's going to need a lot of people who are not currently in AVT core as well. So probably a new working group is useful. Also, I somehow have not actually personally. Can somebody send the link to that mailing list that was mentioned, and are the archives? Okay, great. Unfortunately,
it's actually next slide. Can you move to the next slide?
You can also paste it in the chat. All right, and I assume it's an Ietf list, so it can be. It's okay, great. Okay, and I assume therefore the archives are all okay. Yeah, I see a list of
sframe at ietf.org.
Great. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to need to move on because we have a few art slides to go through. But what I'm hearing is that there's general interest in doing this work. There seems to be a leaning towards it be its own, hopefully mini working group. So I think the next step is there was talk about a charter being floated around. When people are ready, we need to bring that charter into the dispatch working group list and go through the dispatch discussion on that charter. I notably did not hear a single person say we should do this in Perk. So I think the answer to that is no, and I don't think anyone thinks we should. But if anyone does think we should, you can say that on the list. We don't have time right now.
All right, thanks, folks.
Thank you. And we're going to move forward now into the art section and go very fast. We only have 5 minutes left. So we have some meetings of interest. And the first thing I want to mention is I got messaged by the chairs of ASAP that ASAP is not meeting today. Was that ASAP? Right. Right, yes. So that meeting is not actually going to happen. Apparently discussion decided that they didn't need to meet today. We have a couple of BOFs happening in the art area. The ASDF on semantic data definitions for IoT. And then we also have the web core for revision of core email specs coming out on Wednesday. So first one's Tuesday, the next one's Wednesday. My understanding is that there is some move to email core to advance the standards to the next level. And some other interesting meetings. A little bit later today, we've got the RFC Editor Future Development Program. That is a IAB program for on the RFC Editor Futures, but it is open for open participation. Tomorrow, we will have something new from the IAB Open meeting. Then on Thursday, we will have both Security Dispatch and General Area Dispatch. And the ADs asked me to mention that the General Area Dispatch meeting is going to include a discussion on changes for the non-com eligibility criteria. So that's pretty important for our core culture. So I encourage people to participate. And then on Friday, we have the SHMOO meeting, the Stay Home Meet Only Online. And that should be pretty interesting in lieu of all the things that we've learned this week trying to actually do what we're about to talk about how to do. So does anyone have any closing comments? Let's see, did I miss any slides here? So anyone have any closing comments or other business? We have 3 minutes left on our agenda. So if anyone wants to say something about one of these BOFs. I'm not hearing it. So we appreciate everyone's time in this very interesting discussion of a interesting experiment of a meet-only meeting. I think it went reasonably well with a few minor glitches. I'm sure there will be plenty of opportunity to give people's opinion, for people to give opinions on how this worked. And that might be an interesting discussion on that Friday meeting. So we'll give people back 2 minutes. Thanks everyone, and have a very good rest of your online IETF week. Wait, I see Spencer wishes to speak. Maybe not. Now I'm realizing I don't actually know how to close the meeting.
Top right corner.
That if I leave the room, does that close the meeting?
I think it auto stops at the appropriate time.
At the time? Okay. Again, thanks everyone. See you later.